The slap came so fast I didn't even feel it at first. I just heard it, a sharp crack in the middle of my father's dining room, loud enough to silence the grandfather clock in the hall, loud enough to make my sister lower her wine glass and smile like she'd finally gotten the ending she wanted. My mother's hand was still in the air when she screamed, "You don't have a choice anymore." In front of me lay a stack of legal papers transferring $11 million in property to my sister. My father leaned over the table and barked, "Sign it." I didn't. And then the lawyer at the end of the table adjusted his glasses, looked straight at my mother, and asked very quietly, "Ma'am, do you have any idea who this property really belongs to?" I had walked into that house expecting a family dinner. That was my first mistake. My father had called 3 days earlier while I was still on base, his voice warm in that careful, unnatural way people sound when they're performing affection instead of feeling it. He said, "Your mother wants everyone together. Your sister's coming in from Charlotte. It's been too long, Emily." He said it like we were one of those close Southern families in magazine ads, the kind that gathered around polished wood tables and passed casseroles between generations with soft laughter and no history clinging to the walls. But my family had history in the walls. You could feel it in that house the minute you stepped inside. The air always smelled faintly of lemon polish, old money, and tension. Even as a kid, I'd known how to read the weather in those rooms better than the forecast. A quiet kitchen meant my mother was angry. My father's office door half closed meant trouble. Crystal glasses on the dining table on a Thursday night meant someone had decided a conversation needed witnesses. When I pulled into the circular driveway that evening, the house was lit like it was hosting a holiday party. The windows glowed gold against the darkening sky, and for one weak, foolish second, I let myself believe maybe this time really was different. Maybe age had softened them. Maybe distance had done what years of effort hadn't. Maybe coming home in uniform still meant something to them even now. I should have known better the moment I saw my sister's Mercedes already parked by the fountain. Claire never came early. Claire arrived when the room was ready for her. I shut off my engine and sat there a moment with both hands on the steering wheel. My reflection in the windshield looked steadier than I felt. Navy dress uniform, crisp blonde hair, pinned back tight face, composed in the way the Army had taught me to compose it. You learn after enough years in service how to let nothing show unless you want it to. How to take the hit after the hit after the hit and keep your breathing even. How to hold your ground while someone louder, richer, or more powerful tries to make you feel small. That training was the only reason I made it through the front door without turning around. My mother greeted me first, but not with a hug. She looked me over the way she used to inspect my room when I was 16, not to see me, but to find flaws. "You came in uniform." "I drove straight from the post," I said. Her mouth tightened. "Well, at least sit down before dinner gets cold." "Not I missed you, not it's good to see you, just instructions." Claire was already seated in the dining room, one leg crossed over the other, perfectly styled, a cream silk blouse draped over her like she'd stepped out of a luxury real estate ad. She stood just enough to air kiss my cheek. Emily. Wow, still doing the military thing. I looked at her, still breathing through other people's money. Her smile flickered, then returned sharper at the edges. Claire had always hated when I refused to play the role assigned to me. In our family, she was the golden daughter, beautiful, delicate, deserving. I was the durable one, the one who could handle disappointment, the one they expected to absorb impact and call it loyalty. My father entered last as usual, making an entrance in his own house like he was chairman of the board arriving late to a meeting. He was wearing a charcoal suit instead of his usual cashmere sweater, which told me this wasn't dinner, this was business. His jaw was set. His silver hair neatly combed back, the same expression on his face he used when he'd already made a decision, and only needed everyone else to submit to it. And then I saw the man sitting at the far end of the table. He was maybe in his 60s, lean, composed, wearing a dark suit and rimless glasses. A leather briefcase rested by his chair. He rose politely when I looked at him. "Captain Emily Warren," he said with a small nod. "Pleasure." I stopped walking. "Who are you?" My father answered before he could. "Sit down." No one says sit down like a father who thinks the words themselves are an inheritance. I sat, but not because he ordered it. I sat because I wanted to see the battlefield before I chose where to stand. Dinner was barely touched. My mother had set out roast chicken, green beans, warm rolls wrapped in a white towel. The food smelled good, but the room smelled stronger, expensive perfume, red wine paper, and something metallic under it all. Anticipation, maybe. Predation. The kind of scent a storm has before it breaks. Claire folded her napkin with delicate fingers. Let's not drag this out. That was when the lawyer opened his briefcase and placed a folder in front of me. Cream-colored paper, tabs, signatures marked in yellow where mine would go, transfer of controlling interest, real estate holdings, agricultural land, mineral rights, trust conversion language. Even before I finished reading the first page, a cold pressure started to build behind my ribs. I looked up slowly. What is this? My father clasped his hands on the table. A family solution. To what problem? Claire sighed as if I were being difficult on purpose. To the fact that you're sitting on property you don't need while my life is falling apart. I turned to her. Your divorce is not my emergency. Her eyes hardened. That property should have been mine years ago. I actually laughed then once because it was so absurd it almost felt theatrical. The land in West Texas. The ranch parcels. The commercial tract outside Austin. I bought the first acre when I was 24. I've paid the taxes, handled the lease agreements, sat in folding chairs with surveyors, bankers, and county officials while you were posting spa weekends online. How exactly should that have been yours? Claire's cheeks flushed. My mother jumped in. Don't talk to your sister that way. She has children to think about. And I have a life I built from nothing, I said. My father leaned forward. Nothing. You built it because this family gave you a name, a foundation, connections. I held his gaze. No, I built it because the Army taught me discipline, because I worked when other people slept, because I invested my deployment pay instead of spending it, and because every time this family underestimated me, I learned to move without asking permission. His eyes darkened. He hated that tone in me, calm, direct, impossible to bully. It reminded him I had become someone he could no longer control by raising his voice. He pushed the papers a little closer. Sign them. Tonight. I looked down again. $11 million. Years of risk work and patience reduced to a neat stack of pages, and my father's expectation that I would surrender it because Claire wanted rescuing again. Why would I do that, I asked. My mother answered this time, her voice trembling with indignation. Because we are your family. There it was, the oldest weapon in the house, not love, obligation. I set the folder aside. No. Claire stared at me, stunned, like the word itself was vulgar. My father's face changed, first color rising up his neck, jaw flexing, nostrils widening. Excuse me. I said no. You will not embarrass me at this table. I almost smiled. Then maybe don't try to steal from me at it. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the clock in the hallway ticking off each second like a countdown. My mother stood so fast her chair scraped hard against the wood floor. Before I could rise, before I could even fully read the motion, her palm struck my face. The sound cracked through the room. My head turned with the blow. I tasted copper at the inside of my cheek. Heat spread across my skin in a sharp, humiliating bloom. For a second all I saw was the shine of the chandelier blurred into white streaks. Then my mother screamed, "You don't have a choice anymore." Claire was breathing fast now, eyes bright. My father pointed at the papers and roared, "Sign them." But I didn't reach for the pen. I straightened slowly in my chair, put one hand flat on the table, and turned my face back toward them. Years of drills, years of command presence, years of learning not to flinch under pressure settled into my spine like steel. That was when the lawyer finally moved. He removed his glasses, polished them once with a folded handkerchief, and looked not at my father, not at Claire, but directly at my mother. His voice was quiet enough that everyone had to lean in to hear it. "Ma'am," he said, "do you have any idea who this property really belongs to?" My father slammed his palm against the table so hard the silverware jumped. "Belongs to WHO, he shouted. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" My father's outburst lingered in the air like smoke. For a moment no one moved. Even the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to hesitate between ticks, as if the entire house were waiting for the lawyer to decide whether to light the match or put it out. The man did neither. He simply folded his hands and looked down at the papers in front of me, calm, in a way that felt deliberate. Controlled. Like someone who knew the outcome of a battle before the first shot was fired. My mother was the first to recover. "I don't know what kind of nonsense you're trying to start," she snapped, her voice still shaking from the adrenaline of slapping me. "We asked you here to handle paperwork, not to create confusion." The lawyer inclined his head politely. "Of course, ma'am, I'm not creating confusion. I'm trying to prevent a legal mistake." Claire leaned forward, her tone icy. "There is no mistake. Emily is transferring ownership to me. That's already been agreed upon." I turned my head slightly. "By who?" She didn't answer. My father pointed toward the documents again. "You are being unreasonable. Your sister is going through a divorce. She needs stability. That property will keep her secure." I wiped the corner of my mouth with my thumb. The metallic taste had faded, but the heat in my cheek remained not painful, just present, like a reminder of exactly where I stood in this family. "Then help her," I said quietly. "You own 3 houses, 2 investment portfolios, and half a dozen partnerships. You help her. That is not the point." "It seems like exactly the point." His voice sharpened. "The point is that the land should have stayed within the family." "It is within the family." "No," he said, leaning forward, eyes locked on mine. "It's sitting under your control." There it was again, control. That was always the word he circled back to. Not fairness, not need, control. Claire exhaled dramatically, as if exhausted by my stubbornness. "Emily, you don't even live here. You're deployed half the time. You don't understand what it's like raising children alone, managing expenses, worrying about the future. You don't need $11 million. "I don't need it," I said, "but I earned it." She gave a tight laugh. "You didn't earn land, you just got lucky." The words hung there. I watched her carefully. She believed that. Or maybe she needed to believe that. If my success were luck, then she didn't have to confront the alternative that effort, discipline, and risk-taking had built something she never tried to build. "I bought the first parcel," I said evenly. 300 acres outside Midland. Remember Dad said it was a waste of money?" My father shifted in his chair. That was different. "No," I said, "that was the beginning." The room felt smaller now, the air tighter. My mother crossed her arms, still standing behind her chair like a judge who had already decided the verdict. "You're making this emotional. This is practical. Your sister needs help." I looked at her. When I was 19 and sleeping in a barracks room during training, did I need help? She hesitated just for a second. When I came home after my first deployment and asked if I could stay here for a few months while I looked at properties, did I need help? That was years ago. "And you said no," I continued. "You said it would disrupt Claire's routine." Claire's eyes flicked away. She remembered. My father's patience snapped. "We are not relitigating ancient history. You are missing the bigger picture. This family survives because we support each other." I almost smiled at the phrasing. Support. It sounded noble. It sounded balanced. But in this house, support had always flowed one direction. "Support," I repeated, "or redistribution." His jaw tightened. "You are being disrespectful." "I'm being accurate." The lawyer cleared his throat gently, not interrupting so much as reminding everyone he still existed. Perhaps he said it would be helpful if we clarified something before any signatures are discussed. My father turned sharply. "We don't need clarification, we need her signature." With respect, the lawyer replied, still calm, "You may not have the authority to request it." The words landed softly but carried weight. Claire blinked. My mother frowned. My father's face darkened again. "What are you implying?" he demanded. "I'm suggesting the lawyer said that ownership may not be structured the way you believe." My mother scoffed. "We've managed that property for years. We know exactly how it's structured." "Managed," the lawyer repeated quietly. I watched him now with growing attention. There was something deliberate in the way he chose his words, not confrontational, not dramatic, but precise. He wasn't trying to provoke. He was trying to introduce doubt. Claire shifted in her chair. "This is ridiculous. Emily's name is on everything." "Yes," the lawyer said. "Then she can transfer it." "Not necessarily." The silence that followed felt heavier than the one before. My father leaned forward slowly. "Explain." The lawyer glanced at me, then back at the papers. Before we discuss transfer, we need to confirm the origin of ownership, specifically who established the trust that holds the majority of these assets. Claire frowned. Trust? I looked down again at the documents. I had skimmed them before, but now my eyes slowed. There it was, trust language buried in the middle. I hadn't paid attention. I'd always handled things directly buying parcels in my name, then restructuring for tax efficiency. But I didn't remember setting up a master trust. That's just legal formatting, my father said quickly. Is it? The lawyer asked. My mother's voice sharpened. We've paid taxes on that land for years. Paying taxes doesn't determine ownership, he replied gently. Claire's confidence started to waver. Dad. He ignored her eyes fixed on the lawyer. You're overcomplicating this. I'm trying to simplify it, the lawyer said. Because if the structure is what I believe it is, then Captain Warren doesn't need to sign anything. She already holds controlling authority. My father laughed, once harsh and dismissive. Of course she does. That's why we're asking her to transfer it. The lawyer shook his head slightly. No, that's not what I mean. My heartbeat slowed oddly enough. Not fast or slower. The kind of calm that comes before a difficult decision when instinct tells you something fundamental is shifting. What do you mean? I asked. He met my eyes. I mean, the property may never have been under your father's authority to begin with. My mother's expression cracked. That's absurd. Claire looked between them, uncertainty creeping into her posture. Dad. My father's voice rose again. This is nonsense. We oversaw every purchase. Did you? The lawyer asked quietly. The question wasn't aggressive. It didn't need to be. It just sat there waiting. I picked up the folder again, this time reading more carefully. Lines of legal text blurred, then sharpened. Dates, filings. A trust designation I didn't recognize. My name appeared, but not as creator, as beneficiary. A faint chill moved through my chest. What is this? I murmured. My father leaned forward, trying to see. It's just... The lawyer spoke before he could finish. Captain Warren, I suggest you read page 14. I flipped to it. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the words settled into focus. And for the first time that night, I felt something shift, not just in the conversation, but in the balance of power itself. Page 14 wasn't dramatic. It didn't announce itself with bold letters or red ink. It was just another dense block of legal language, the kind most people skim and trust someone else to understand. But halfway down, a line caught my eye, not because it was loud, but because it was precise. Irrevocable family trust established by grantor. I read it again. Then again. The grantor's name sat at the end of the line, typed in clean serif font. My mind registered the letters before my emotions caught up. The room around me blurred slightly, not from shock, but from the slow realization that something foundational had been misrepresented not tonight, but for years. I lifted my eyes toward the lawyer. This trust. When was it created? 8 years ago, he said. 8 years. That was before the Midland parcel doubled in value, before the commercial lease, before the mineral rights deal, before everything snowballed. My father's voice cut in quickly. We restructured for tax efficiency, that's all. The lawyer didn't look at him. That is one interpretation. My mother stepped forward. Interpretation. This is our family property. He nodded politely. It may be, but ownership depends on who created the trust and how it was structured. Claire leaned across the table, her confidence slipping into irritation. This is ridiculous. Emily's name is all over this. She can transfer it. That's the end of it. The lawyer folded his hands. That would only be true if she were the sole authority. The document suggests otherwise. I scanned the page again. Beneficiary, not grantor. That meant someone else had created the trust and placed me inside it. My pulse stayed steady, but something deeper shifted, a quiet unease, like discovering a door in a house you'd lived in your entire life. Who established it? I asked. The lawyer tilted his head slightly. That's on the previous page. I flipped back. My father's chair creaked as he leaned forward. Emily, this is unnecessary. We've already explained. I raised one hand without looking at him. Just a minute. He fell silent, more from surprise than obedience. I rarely interrupted him growing up. I rarely had the standing to. The previous page listed the grantor. My eyes moved slowly across the text, absorbing each word. My breathing stayed even. I had learned in the army that the calmest person in the room often holds the most leverage. Panic gives away position. Silence forces others to fill it. Claire couldn't handle the silence. "Well, what does it say?" I didn't answer yet. I wanted to understand before speaking. The trust language outlined control conditions, management authority, distribution restrictions, transfer limitations. It wasn't designed for quick movement. It was designed to preserve. My mother's voice sharpened. "Emily, stop dragging this out." I looked up at her. "Did you know about this trust?" She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Of course I did. The hesitation was enough. "And you?" I asked my father. He exhaled through his nose. I oversaw everything. The lawyer finally spoke again gently. "Oversight and authorship are not the same." Claire shifted in her chair, frustration bleeding into anxiety. "Can someone just explain what's happening?" I rested my fingertips on the paper. "This trust limits transfers." "That's standard," my father said quickly. "It also defines control." "You're overthinking." And I continued, my voice still calm. "It doesn't list you as grantor." The words landed quietly. My mother frowned. "That doesn't matter." "It might," the lawyer said. My father's patience snapped again. "You're making this unnecessarily complicated. The intent is obvious. The land stays in the family. Claire needs support. Emily signs. Done." I leaned back slightly. Intent doesn't override structure. Claire let out a breath. "This is unbelievable. You're really going to hide behind technicalities." I looked at her. "You're asking me to sign away $11 million. Technicalities matter." She shook her head. "You've changed." "No," I said softly. I stopped apologizing. That quieted her more than shouting would have. The lawyer reached forward and tapped the document lightly. "Captain Warren, may I ask something?" "Go ahead." "Who handled the filing when this trust was established?" I thought for a moment. 8 years ago. That was when I'd been rotating between training cycles and short deployments. I remembered signing things, but nothing comprehensive. I'd trusted the process, trusted the paperwork, trusted someone. "I don't remember," I admitted. He nodded as if that confirmed something. "That's not unusual." My father leaned forward again, voice hard. "Enough. This conversation is pointless." Emily signed the documents. I didn't move. The room tightened again, tension building like pressure before a storm. My mother stepped closer, her tone now coaxing instead of angry. "Emily, sweetheart, your sister needs this. You don't even use that land." "I lease it." "That's not the same." "It is when the lease pays for itself." Claire's voice sharpened. "You're being selfish." I met her eyes. Selfish would be expecting someone else to solve your problems. Her face flushed. "You don't understand what I'm going through." "You're right," I said, "because when I went through things, I handled them myself." My father pushed his chair back slightly, the legs scraping the floor. "You will regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but I won't regret reading before signing." The lawyer gave the faintest nod, almost imperceptible. My mother folded her arms. "So what now?" I looked back at the document. "Now we figure out who actually controls this trust." Claire leaned back, frustration mixing with uncertainty. "This is insane." The lawyer spoke softly. "Not insane, just incomplete." My father's voice rose again. "Incomplete, we've handled this property for years." Handling, the lawyer replied, is not the same as owning. Silence fell again, the kind that changes temperature. I turned another page, slowly scanning for authority clauses. My name appeared again: beneficiary, conditional authority, transfer limitations requiring grantor authorization. I felt the shift more clearly now. Something fundamental had been misunderstood, not by me alone, but by everyone in this room. I looked up. "If I can't transfer without the grantor," I said quietly, "then we need to know who that is." The lawyer nodded. "Exactly." My father leaned forward, irritation turning into something closer to unease. "We already know." "Do we?" the lawyer asked. Claire looked at him. "Then tell us." He adjusted his glasses, calm as ever. "I think Captain Warren should read the signature line." I lowered my eyes to the bottom of the page. The name there changed everything. The signature line didn't look dramatic either. No bold font, no underline. Just a name typed beneath the legal text, followed by a notarization stamp and a date from 8 years earlier. But the moment my eyes settled on it, the room seemed to pull inward, like the air had been quietly vacuumed away. I didn't react immediately. That was instinct. Years in uniform teach you to absorb information before showing emotion. Surprise is a luxury. Composure is a survival skill. So I read the name once then again, then traced the notarization with my eyes to confirm it wasn't an amendment or an addendum. It wasn't. Claire shifted impatiently. Well, what does it say? My mother leaned forward. Emily, answer her. I looked up slowly. The grantor isn't me. My father gave a short, dismissive laugh. Of course it isn't. We set it up for you. That's not what it says. He waved a hand. Technical wording. The lawyer finally spoke, his voice still measured. Who is listed? I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to say it, but because I wanted to understand the implication before releasing it into the room. Once spoken, it would change the dynamic. Words like signatures carry weight. Claire leaned forward, frustration sharpening her tone. Emily, stop being dramatic. I met her gaze briefly, then returned to the page. The grantor is someone else. My father's patience snapped. We know that. Just say it. I inhaled once. It lists a primary grantor and a controlling authority clause. The lawyer's expression sharpened slightly. Controlling authority. Yes. And who holds it? I tapped the page. The grantor. My mother scoffed. That's obvious. Yes, I said quietly, but the clause also restricts transfer without written authorization. Claire frowned. So get authorization. I looked up. From the grantor. The room went still. My father's voice hardened. Then we'll get it. The lawyer tilted his head. If the grantor is available? My mother frowned. What does that mean? He didn't answer directly. Captain Warren, is there a successor listed? I scanned the document. Yes. And conditional. My father leaned forward, tension now visible in his posture. You're wasting time. I set the folder flat on the table. No, I'm trying to understand why I can't legally transfer what you're asking for. Claire's composure began to crack. This is insane. It's your property. Maybe, I said. The lawyer nodded slightly. Or maybe it's structured to prevent exactly what's happening tonight. My father's eyes flashed. Prevent what? Coercive transfer. The word hung in the air. My mother stiffened. No one is coercing anyone. The lawyer glanced briefly at my cheek, still faintly flushed. He didn't comment, but the gesture said enough. Claire shifted in her chair. This is ridiculous. Emily can just sign. Not without violating the trust, he replied calmly. My father's voice dropped dangerous now. You're implying we don't have authority over family property. I'm saying the lawyer answered that authority depends on structure, not assumption. Silence followed. The tension had changed. Earlier, the room felt like pressure pushing toward me. Now it felt suspended, uncertain, like a balance that hadn't yet tipped. I flipped the page again, reading the next section carefully. Distribution limitations, asset preservation language, a clause referencing long-term stewardship. This wasn't a trust designed for quick liquidation. It was built to endure. Why would someone structure it this way? Claire muttered. To protect it, I said. From who? I didn't answer. The implication was obvious. My father leaned back, folding his arms. This is getting absurd. Emily, you're overcomplicating a simple decision. I met his eyes. It stopped being simple when I realized I might not have the legal right to do what you're asking. My mother's voice softened, almost pleading. Emily, sweetheart, we're just trying to help your sister. I studied her face. There was genuine emotion there, but also something else. Urgency, fear maybe. Not fear of losing me, fear of losing control. If I sign, I said quietly, and it violates the trust, the transfer could be challenged. Claire frowned. By who? The lawyer answered gently. By the grantor, or any designated authority. My father's jaw tightened. This is pointless speculation. Is it? The lawyer asked. I looked back at the signature line again. The date mattered. 8 years ago. That was before the biggest acquisitions. Before the value exploded. Whoever created this trust had anticipated growth. Whoever set this up, I said slowly, expected this property to become significant. Claire crossed her arms. Then they should want it in the family. It already is. No, she said sharply, it's stuck with you. I shook my head. It's protected. The lawyer gave another small nod. My father leaned forward again, impatience returning. Enough. We are not debating semantics. Emily signed the papers. I didn't move. He stared at me, disbelief creeping into his expression. You're really going to refuse? I'm going to read. My mother exhaled sharply. You're embarrassing us. I almost smiled. No, I'm slowing you down. Claire's voice sharpened. You don't trust us. I looked at her. Should I? She didn't answer. The lawyer reached forward and slid another document toward me. There's an addendum. It clarifies authority. I scanned it. The language was tighter. Transfer restrictions. Grantor approval required. Successor clause activated only under specific conditions. My pulse remained steady, but the implication deepened. I couldn't sign even if I wanted to, not without triggering legal conflict. This changes things, I murmured. My father's voice rose again. It changes nothing. It changes everything, the lawyer said quietly. The room froze. My mother looked between us. Explain. He folded his hands. If Captain Warren cannot legally transfer the property, then tonight's request is invalid. Claire stared at him. You're saying she can't give it to me? I'm saying, he replied, she may not have the authority. My father slammed his palm on the table again. Then who does? The lawyer met his eyes calm as ever. The grantor. And where is the grantor, he demanded. The lawyer glanced at the document, then back at me. That, he said softly, is the real question. The word grantor lingered in the room like something alive. No one spoke for several seconds, but the silence felt different now, not tense but fragile, as if one wrong movement might shatter whatever illusion had held this conversation together. Claire broke first, then call them. Her voice sounded thinner than before, stripped of its earlier certainty. She looked between my father and the lawyer, expecting someone to restore the structure she'd relied on. No one did. My father leaned back slowly, his expression tightening in a way I'd rarely seen. Not anger, not yet. Calculation. We don't need to call anyone. This is internal family business. The lawyer's reply came gently. If the authority is external, it may not be. My mother shook her head. There is no external authority. This property has always been ours. Managed by you, the lawyer corrected quietly. The distinction landed harder than any raised voice. I kept my hands resting lightly on the table, palms down, grounding myself. The Army teaches you to recognize when control shifts, not suddenly but gradually, like weight moving across a bridge. Something had shifted. The urgency in my parents' voices, the uncertainty in Claire's posture, the lawyer's calm precision, it all pointed in one direction. Who filed this, I asked. The lawyer answered without hesitation. A private attorney, retained by the grantor. My father's eyes narrowed. Which attorney? I can provide the name. Do it. The lawyer slid a page forward. My father leaned in, scanned it, and for the first time that night he went completely still. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it. His shoulders tightened. His breathing changed. The reaction was subtle but unmistakable. My mother noticed it too. What is it? He handed her the paper. Nothing. She read it, and her composure fractured. That can't be right. Claire leaned across. What? My mother didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the document, lips pressed together. She looked up at me, and for the first time that night there wasn't anger in her expression. There was uncertainty. Emily, she said slowly, did you know about this? Number. Claire's voice sharpened. Know about what? My father cut in too quickly. It doesn't matter. The trust can still be modified. The lawyer shook his head slightly. Not if it's irrevocable. My mother's voice rose. Irrevocable. Yes, ma'am. Claire's confidence slipped further. What does that mean? It means, he replied calmly, the structure cannot be altered without the grantor's consent. My father leaned forward, voice hard. Then we'll get consent. The lawyer held his gaze. If the grantor is available. The phrase again, available. My pulse slowed further, my mind moving through possibilities. If the grantor wasn't present, authority shifted to successor. But successor clauses usually required conditions, incapacity, death, or formal transfer. I scanned the page again. There it was. Successor authority conditional. I read the clause carefully. My name appeared again, but not in the way I expected. Not as owner, not as grantor. As designated beneficiary with protected interest. That meant I could receive benefits but not override structure. Claire leaned back, rubbing her temples. This is ridiculous. We're arguing over technical wording. It's not technical, I said quietly. It defines control. She looked at me. You're enjoying this. No, I said. I'm understanding it. My father's patience finally cracked. Enough. This lawyer is overcomplicating things. Emily signed the documents. I met his eyes. I can't. You won't. I can't. The distinction mattered. He stared at me, disbelief sharpening into anger. You're telling me you don't have the authority over your own property? I'm telling you the trust limits transfer. My mother shook her head. This is absurd. The lawyer spoke again, calm as ever. Not absurd, protective. Claire exhaled sharply. Protective from what? He didn't answer directly. From irreversible decisions. The room quieted again. I studied the signature page once more. The grantor's name sat there steady and undeniable. Whoever created this trust had intended permanence. They had anticipated pressure. They had designed barriers. Why would someone do that? Claire murmured. To preserve the assets, I said. For who? I looked down. The beneficiary. She stared at me. That's you. Yes. My father's voice hardened. Then the beneficiary decides. Not in an irrevocable trust, the lawyer replied. The words landed like a verdict. My mother's hands trembled slightly. So she can't transfer anything. Not without authorization. Claire's eyes widened. Then this whole meeting may not accomplish what you intended, the lawyer finished. My father stood abruptly, chair scraping loud against the floor. This is unacceptable. No one responded. He looked at me. You're hiding behind legal technicalities. I'm respecting them. You're humiliating this family. I held his gaze. You tried to take $11 million from me. His jaw tightened. We tried to redistribute family assets. That's not your decision. It is when I built this family. I didn't raise my voice. And I built that property. The silence returned heavier now. Claire looked between us, her voice small. So what happens now? The lawyer answered quietly. We identify the grantor, or confirm successor authority. My father's eyes flashed. We already know who the grantor is. The lawyer tilted his head. Do we? My mother whispered, it can't be. I looked up slowly. Who? The lawyer didn't answer immediately. He turned the page, slid it toward me, and tapped the notarized signature again. Captain Warren, he said softly, read the full line. Not just the name. I leaned forward. Beneath the grantor's name was a second clause, smaller, almost overlooked. And that clause changed everything. The clause beneath the signature was only one sentence long, but it reframed the entire document. It specified that the grantor had established the trust for the exclusive preservation of designated assets until beneficiary independence and discretionary control criteria are met. The language was formal, almost clinical, but the intent was unmistakable. Whoever had created this trust hadn't simply protected property, they had anticipated conflict. They had designed a structure that delayed control until a certain threshold had been reached. I read it twice before speaking. This isn't just a preservation trust, I said quietly. It's conditional. The lawyer nodded. Yes. Claire frowned. Conditional on what? I scanned the paragraph above. Independence. Financial self-sufficiency. Demonstrated management. My father scoffed. You already meet those conditions. That's irrelevant. Not necessarily, the lawyer replied. My mother leaned forward. What else is there? I traced the text again. There was another reference, discretionary activation. That meant the grantor retained authority to decide when the beneficiary gained full control. My pulse stayed steady, but the implication deepened. This means, I said slowly, control doesn't automatically pass. Claire's voice sharpened. So we just contact the grantor. The lawyer looked at her. If that's possible. My father's tone hardened. Of course it's possible. The lawyer didn't argue. He simply rested his hands on the table and waited. The silence stretched again. My mother looked at my father, searching his face. You knew about this. He hesitated. It was brief but unmistakable. I knew the structure. That's not what I asked. I knew enough. Claire's voice rose. Dad? He ignored her eyes fixed on me. This changes nothing. You still control the property operationally. Operationally, I repeated, not structurally. That's semantics. It's authority. The lawyer spoke gently. Authority determines legality. Claire leaned back, rubbing her temples again. This is unbelievable. I studied the page once more. The trust wasn't just restrictive, it was strategic. It ensured that the assets couldn't be pressured out of the beneficiary prematurely. Whoever designed it had expected exactly this kind of confrontation. Why would someone anticipate this? Claire muttered. No one answered. My father's patience snapped again. Enough. Emily, you are overthinking this. The property remains under your management. You can still transfer it. I shook my head. Not without violating the trust. My mother's voice trembled. Emily, we're your family. I looked at her calmly. That doesn't override the document. Claire's frustration turned into anger. You're hiding behind paperwork. I'm respecting it. She leaned forward. You don't trust us. I met her eyes. Should I? She didn't respond. The lawyer slid another sheet toward me. There's one more section. I read it carefully. Dispute protection clause. Transfer attempts under duress could be invalidated. The wording was subtle but unmistakable. I exhaled quietly. It specifically guards against coercion. My father's eyes narrowed. No one is coercing you. I didn't reply. The silence answered for me. My mother folded her arms. So you're refusing? I'm saying I can't legally sign. Claire's voice sharpened. This is ridiculous. The lawyer spoke softly. Not ridiculous, protective. My father leaned forward again. Then who authorizes transfer? The grantor, the lawyer replied. And if the grantor isn't available, then the trust remains unchanged. The words landed like a door closing. Claire stared at me. So you're just keeping everything? I'm keeping what I built. My father's voice dropped colder now. You think this makes you powerful? No, I said quietly. It makes me protected. He stood slowly, hands braced on the table. You're tearing this family apart. I held his gaze. You tried to take $11 million. That was for your sister. That wasn't your decision. It is when I built everything. I shook my head. You didn't build this. The room fell silent again. My mother looked between us, her voice barely above a whisper. So what happens now? The lawyer answered calmly. The trust remains in effect. No transfer occurs. Claire's shoulders sagged. That's it? That's it. My father's jaw tightened, anger simmering beneath the surface. This isn't over. The lawyer looked at him evenly. Legally, it may be. My father turned to me. You planned this. No, I said. You did. He stared at me, breathing hard, the authority he'd relied on all night slipping piece by piece. For the first time, he didn't have the leverage he expected. The documents, the structure, the calm presence of the lawyer, all of it had shifted the balance. Claire looked down at the papers, then at me. So you're really not signing? Number. My mother closed her eyes briefly as if absorbing the reality. Then we have nothing. I didn't answer. I simply rested my hands on the table, steady, composed, letting the silence settle. The power in the room had shifted, not dramatically, not loudly, but undeniably. No one spoke for a long time after that. The house seemed quieter than it had any right to be, like the walls themselves were listening. The chandelier hummed faintly overhead, and somewhere in the kitchen a refrigerator motor kicked on the ordinary sound, almost surreal against the weight of what had just happened. My father remained standing, palms pressed flat against the table. He looked older than he had an hour earlier. Not physically the same silver hair, the same sharp posture, but something in his certainty had cracked, and without it the authority he carried like a second skin seemed thinner. You're making a mistake, he said finally. His voice was lower now. Not a command, not even anger, just a last attempt to pull the conversation back into territory he understood. I folded the documents slowly and set them aside. No, I'm making a decision. Claire leaned back in her chair, arms wrapped around herself. Her earlier confidence had dissolved into a restless tension. So that's it. You just walk away and keep everything. I don't need to walk away, I said. Nothing changed. She laughed bitterly. Everything changed. She was right. It had. Not on paper, the trust hadn't moved, the land hadn't shifted, the numbers hadn't altered, but the balance between us had flipped. For years, I had been the one expected to yield. Tonight, for the first time, I hadn't. My mother lowered herself slowly into her chair. The anger that had fueled her earlier had drained away, leaving something quieter, more fragile. Emily, we were trying to protect your sister. I understand that, I said. Then why won't you help her? I paused, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted it to land cleanly. Helping isn't the same as surrendering. Claire looked at me sharply. You think we're asking you to surrender? You asked me to sign away $11 million. That's family. That's leverage. The word sat between us. My father straightened slightly. You're turning this into a power struggle. It already was one. The lawyer remained silent, watching hands folded. He hadn't spoken in several minutes, but his presence anchored the moment. Not taking sides, just ensuring the structure held. My mother exhaled slowly. What do you want, Emily? It was the first genuine question of the night. I considered it carefully. Not revenge, not humiliation, just clarity. I want the property to remain under the trust. I want no transfer. And I want this conversation to end. Claire shook her head. That's not fair. I met her gaze. Fair would have been asking. We did ask. You asked with documents already printed. She looked down, unable to deny it. My father pushed away from the table and walked toward the window. Outside the driveway, lights cast long shadows across the lawn. He stood there a moment, hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man recalculating. You realize, he said without turning, that this damages trust. I almost smiled. The irony wasn't lost on me. The trust protected me. He turned slowly. You're proud of that. I'm calm about it. Claire leaned forward again, voice softer now. Emily, I really do need help. There it was, not entitlement, not demand, just admission. I studied her face, the tension in her jaw, the faint exhaustion in her eyes. For the first time that night, she looked less like a rival and more like someone cornered by her own decisions. I'm not abandoning you, I said. She blinked. You're not... No, but I'm not giving up control either. My mother leaned forward slightly. Then what are you saying? I'm saying I'll help on my terms. My father frowned. What terms? I rested my hands lightly on the table. Structured support, not ownership transfer, no liquidation, no asset shift. Claire frowned. You mean loans? Or managed distributions? Enough to stabilize you, not enough to dismantle the trust. The lawyer finally spoke again. That would comply with the structure. My father's expression hardened. You're negotiating with your own family. I'm protecting what I built. Claire sat back slowly. You'd really do that, help me, but not give it to me. Yes. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once. Not gratitude, not yet, but acceptance. My mother exhaled relief, softening her shoulders. That's reasonable. My father didn't respond immediately. He studied me measuring something. The silence stretched. You've changed, he said quietly. No, I replied. I stopped folding. The room settled into a different quiet, now not hostile, not tense, just unfamiliar. The hierarchy that had defined our family for decades had shifted. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. The lawyer closed his briefcase gently. Then there's nothing further tonight. My father gave a short nod. No, there isn't. Claire gathered her purse slower than before. My mother folded her napkin carefully, as if restoring order through small rituals. The moment was ending, not with drama, but with quiet finality. I stood last. As I moved toward the door, my father spoke again. Emily. I turned. You didn't take revenge, he said. I held his gaze. I didn't need to. He nodded slowly, understanding settling in. I stepped outside into the cool night air. The tension of the house fell away behind me. The sky stretched wide above the driveway, clear and steady. For the first time that evening, I felt the weight lift, not because I'd won, but because I'd stopped losing. Before I got into my car, I looked back once at the glowing windows. Families don't change in a single night. But sometimes the balance does. And once it shifts, it never fully returns. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been asked to give up something you built or forced to choose between family and self-respect, I'd like to hear where you stand. Share your thoughts below, and tell me where you're listening from. Stories like this remind us that strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to hold your ground. We share stories every day about choices, consequences, and the moments that redefine us. So subscribe if you want to continue this journey with us. Thank you for being here and for listening. The moment my father blocked the entrance, the string quartet kept playing like nothing was wrong. Crystal glasses chimed softly. White roses filled the air with a delicate sweetness. And then his voice cut through it all, cold, sharp, and loud enough for every guest to hear. Don't step inside, you're not worthy of this family. 100 heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. My sister froze at the end of the aisle, bouquet trembling in her hands. The groom frowned, confused, looking from my father to me. I'm sorry, he asked quietly, what's happening? My father didn't hesitate. She's a disgrace to my bloodline, sir. The groom looked at me and suddenly staggered back. Oh my God, is that her? The room went completely silent. I hadn't seen my father in 8 years, but nothing about him had softened with time. He stood in front of the ballroom doors like a wall made of tailored charcoal wool and quiet authority, his silver hair perfectly combed cufflinks glinting under the chandelier lights. He didn't raise his voice again because he didn't need to. His disapproval alone carried the weight of a verdict. You shouldn't have come, he said low enough that only I could hear. You were not invited. The marble floor beneath my shoes reflected the overhead lights in soft gold circles. Guests in tuxedos and pastel dresses watched from a distance, pretending not to stare, but failing badly. Somewhere behind me, a waiter stopped mid-step, balancing a tray of champagne flutes, unsure whether to retreat or stay frozen like everyone else. I came to watch Victoria get married, I answered calmly. My voice surprised even me. It sounded steady, almost detached, that's all. You lost that privilege when you embarrassed this family, he replied. His eyes flicked briefly to my uniform, dark navy dress blues pressed so sharply they could cut paper. The ribbons on my chest caught the light. I saw his jaw tighten. My sister Victoria shifted near the aisle. Her ivory gown shimmered like frost under the chandeliers. She leaned toward one of her bridesmaids, whispering something that made the woman's lips curl. Victoria didn't even try to hide her smile. She actually showed up, she murmured loud enough for the first rows to hear. I ignored her. My father stepped closer, lowering his voice further. I told you years ago, he said, there is no place for you here. You chose to walk away. I chose to serve, I corrected gently. You chose humiliation. The words didn't sting the way they once did. 8 years earlier, they would have cut deep. Now they felt like echoes, familiar, distant, almost predictable. I had replayed versions of this conversation in my mind during long deployments, during quiet nights overseas, during flights home that never ended at his door. I'm not here to argue, I said. I'll stand in the back. I won't speak to anyone. You will leave, he replied. A murmur spread through the guests. The groom, Daniel Whitmore, stepped forward from the altar, confusion creasing his forehead. He looked like someone trying to solve a puzzle in real time. Tall, composed, his tuxedo perfectly tailored, but his eyes now searching, uncertain. Sir, he addressed my father politely, is everything all right? My father straightened, shifting instantly into his public persona, the confident businessman, the gracious host. A minor family matter, he said. Nothing to concern you with. Daniel's gaze moved to me. He studied my face, then the uniform, then my eyes. Something flickered there, recognition struggling to surface. I'm sorry, he said carefully, have we met? No, my father answered quickly. I shook my head. I don't think so. Daniel didn't look convinced. His brow furrowed deeper. He took a small step closer, like he was trying to see me from a different angle. My father subtly shifted his body to block him, but it was too late. The moment had already begun to tilt. Behind them, the officiant cleared his throat awkwardly. The musicians faltered their notes, drifting off key before stopping altogether. The room had become a held breath. Remove her, my father said quietly to one of the security staff near the door. The guard hesitated. He looked at my uniform, then at the guests, then back at my father. Sir, I said, remove her. I'll leave, I said before the guard had to move. I didn't want a scene. Not like this. Not for Victoria. Even now I didn't want to ruin her day. But as I turned slightly, Daniel spoke again. Wait. The word landed softly, but everyone heard it. He stepped closer, eyes locked on mine. Did you serve overseas? My father exhaled sharply. This is unnecessary. Yes, I answered. Where? Afghanistan. Daniel's expression changed. The confusion deepened into something else, something sharper, more personal. His shoulders stiffened. What province, he asked. Helmand. He took another step back. His hand brushed the edge of a chair for balance. Oh God, he whispered. My father frowned. Daniel, this is not... Was it... winter? Daniel continued, voice tight. Convoy attack, desert road, snow coming down. A faint sound rippled through the crowd. My heart skipped once hard enough to feel it in my throat. Yes, I said slowly. Daniel stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. The color drained from his face. Oh my God, he said again, louder this time. It's her. My father stiffened. What are you talking about? Daniel didn't answer him. He kept looking at me, disbelief mixing with something like gratitude. His eyes shimmered. You pulled my daughter out of that vehicle, he said, voice breaking slightly. You carried her. The room shifted. Guests leaned closer. Someone whispered. My father's composure cracked just a fraction. You're mistaken, he said sharply. Daniel shook his head. No, I remember her eyes. I remember the uniform. You told me to run. You told me not to look back. The memory rose, uninvited smoke, cold air biting my lungs, the smell of burning fuel, a little girl crying, snow mixing with ash. I hadn't thought about that day in years. I swallowed. You were injured, I said quietly. Daniel's breath caught. You stayed behind. The silence deepened. My father looked from him to me, irritation turning into uncertainty. What is this nonsense, he demanded. Daniel didn't even glance at him. You saved my life, he said to me. No one moved, not the musicians, not the guests, not even Victoria, who now stood frozen at the altar, her smile gone. And for the first time since I arrived, my father didn't speak immediately. He just stared at me like he was seeing someone he didn't recognize at all. The silence didn't break all at once. It fractured slowly like thin ice under weight. A chair shifted somewhere in the back. Someone exhaled too loudly. My sister's bouquet rustled as her grip tightened. My father, however, recovered first. He always did. Control was the currency he traded in, and he wasn't about to lose it in front of 200 guests and a press photographer hired to capture the perfect wedding. This is a misunderstanding, he said firmly, his voice carrying across the ballroom. Daniel, you're under stress. It's your wedding day. Daniel didn't move his eyes from me. No, he said quietly. I don't forget the person who dragged my daughter through gunfire. My father's jaw tightened. Emily, he said, using my name for the first time, but only as a warning. You should leave, now. The sound of my name lingered in the air. Some guests whispered, repeating it. Others leaned closer, curiosity replacing discomfort. I felt the weight of their attention, but it didn't shake me. Years in uniform had taught me how to stand still under scrutiny. I was already leaving, I said calmly. I turned slightly toward the exit, but Daniel stepped forward again. Wait, please. My father's voice hardened. This is not appropriate. Daniel ignored him. Were you stationed near Lashkar Gah? He asked. Yes. He ran a hand over his mouth, trying to steady himself. I knew it. I knew I recognized you. Victoria finally spoke from the aisle, her tone sharp with irritation. Daniel, what are you doing? The ceremony. Just a moment, he said, still looking at me. My father's composure began to crack. This is enough. Security. No, Daniel said more firmly this time. Let her stay. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. The groom, the center of the day, had just countered my father publicly. A ripple moved through the guests like wind through tall grass. My father lowered his voice, but anger sharpened each word. You don't understand. She has no place here. Daniel finally turned to him. Sir, with respect, she saved my family. That has nothing to do with today. It has everything to do with respect. My father stiffened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he considered an equal. The chandelier lights glinted in his eyes as he measured his response. She abandoned her responsibilities to this family, he said. She chose a path that brought disgrace, The words felt distant, like hearing a story about someone else. I had heard variations of them for years. They no longer carried the same weight. Daniel looked back at me. "You never contacted me afterward," he said softly. "It wasn't necessary," I replied. "You disappeared. That's what soldiers do." His expression shifted again, admiration mixed with something like guilt. "You saved my daughter's life. She still talks about you. She calls you the woman in the snow." The image came back clearly now, a small hand gripping my sleeve, her breath shaking her face streaked with soot. I had wrapped her in my jacket while waiting for extraction. "She was brave," I said quietly. Daniel swallowed hard. "She asks if we'll ever find you again." My father exhaled sharply, frustration bleeding into his tone. "Daniel, we're delaying the ceremony for something that happened years ago. This is hardly the time." Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied my uniform again, noticing details he hadn't seen before: the ribbons, the insignia, the calm posture. His voice lowered. "You were injured that day," he said. "Minor. You were bleeding. I've been worse." He nodded slowly, absorbing it. "You stayed behind even after we were evacuated." I hesitated. There were others. The room had grown impossibly quiet again. Guests leaned forward openly now. No one pretended not to listen. Victoria's impatience sharpened. "Daniel, this is ridiculous. We're standing at the altar." He glanced at her briefly, then back at me. "I'm sorry," he told her. "This matters." My father stepped closer to me, his voice barely audible. "You've done enough. Leave before you ruin this day." I met his eyes. I'm not the one making a scene. The truth of it landed harder than I expected. His expression flickered anger mixed with something like embarrassment. Daniel took another step toward us. "Sir, did you know she was in the military?" My father answered coldly. "Unfortunately." "And you still—" "She made her choice," he cut in. "She walked away from this family." I spoke quietly. "I didn't walk away. I was told not to come back." The words hung there heavier than I intended. My father's gaze hardened. "You're twisting the past." I remember it clearly. 8 years earlier, I had stood in his study, the smell of leather and polished wood filling the room, while he told me I was no longer welcome if I joined. I had left with a single suitcase. He never called. Daniel looked between us, understanding dawning slowly. "You cut her off." "That is a private matter," my father snapped. Daniel's voice softened. "She saved my life." My father replied, "And she abandoned her own blood." The contrast hovered in the air. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone near the front shook their head slightly. I took a breath. "I didn't come here to revisit this," I said. "I came to watch my sister get married." Victoria's lips tightened. "You should have stayed away." I nodded once, probably. Daniel's eyes moved to her. "Victoria, did you know about this?" "No," she said quickly, "and it's irrelevant." He didn't look convinced. "She saved my daughter." Victoria hesitated, clearly struggling to maintain composure. "That's admirable. But today is about us." Daniel nodded slowly, though his expression remained conflicted. My father seized the moment. "Exactly, let's proceed." He gestured toward the aisle. The officiant cleared his throat again, relieved. The musicians lifted their bows hesitantly. I turned toward the exit once more. This time no one stopped me immediately. My footsteps echoed softly on marble. The scent of roses followed me. I was almost at the doors when Daniel's voice came again, softer but unmistakable. "Emily." I paused. "Thank you," he said. I didn't turn around. "You already did that," I replied gently. I stepped forward again, but before I could reach the door, a new voice spoke from the second row. "I know her." It was deep, calm, and unmistakably authoritative. The words stopped me mid-step, and the entire room turned again. The voice came from the second row, steady and composed, the kind that didn't need to be loud to command attention. I turned slowly. A man in his late 60s rose from his seat, adjusting his dark suit with deliberate calm. His posture was unmistakable, straight-backed, controlled, the quiet confidence of someone used to being obeyed. A small American flag pin rested on his lapel. He looked directly at me. "I know her," he repeated. A murmur swept through the guests. My father frowned, irritation flashing across his face. "I'm sorry, sir, but—" The man ignored him. He stepped into the aisle, his eyes never leaving mine. Recognition flickered between us. I hadn't expected to see him here, and judging by the slight lift of his eyebrows, he hadn't expected to see me either. "Captain Emily Carter," he said. The title landed like a dropped glass. Conversation stopped. My sister's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. Daniel turned sharply toward him. "Yes, sir," I answered quietly. The man gave a small nod, respectful but restrained. "Didn't think I'd run into you at a wedding." I didn't think so either. My father stiffened. "Captain," he repeated as though the word itself were offensive. The man finally glanced at him. "Yes, Captain, United States Army." The air in the ballroom seemed to change temperature. People who had been whispering leaned forward openly now. The story was no longer private. Daniel stepped closer to the man. "You know her?" The man nodded. "Not personally, but I know what she did." My father's patience snapped. "This is becoming inappropriate. We're in the middle of a ceremony." The man met his gaze calmly. "With respect, sir, this concerns your daughter." "My daughter," my father repeated sharply. "She is not." The man cut him off, not rudely, just firmly. "She's a decorated officer." The words settled heavily in the room. My father's face hardened. "That is irrelevant." Daniel shook his head slightly. "No, it's not." The man continued, his tone measured. "Helmand Province, civilian convoy under attack, winter conditions. She disobeyed a withdrawal order to evacuate non-combatants." Daniel exhaled slowly. "That's exactly what happened." My sister looked from one man to the other, her irritation giving way to unease. "Daniel, what is this?" He didn't answer her. His attention remained fixed on me. "You carried my daughter out of the vehicle," he said again more firmly now. "You told me to run." I remembered the weight of the child in my arms, the heat from the burning engine, the crack of distant gunfire, the cold wind cutting through everything. "You were in shock," I said quietly. "You went back for my ex-wife," he continued. "She was trapped." "You broke the window with your rifle." The memory flickered sharper now, glass-shattering smoke pouring out the metallic taste of adrenaline. I had acted without thinking. There hadn't been time. "You don't need to," I began. "Yes, I do," he said. The man from the second row nodded once as if confirming an unspoken report. "She was recommended for commendation," he added. My father crossed his arms. "Recommended, so nothing official." "It was classified," the man replied calmly. That stopped him. My father's confidence wavered just slightly. Daniel looked stunned. "You never told anyone." I shook my head. It wasn't necessary. My sister let out a quiet laugh, strained and disbelieving. "So we're delaying a wedding because of some story from overseas." Daniel turned to her. "It's not just a story. It happened years ago. It saved my daughter." The tension between them surfaced visibly. Guests exchanged glances. The carefully choreographed perfection of the wedding had fractured beyond repair. My father stepped forward again, trying to reclaim control. "Daniel, with all due respect, we appreciate her service, but this is still a private family matter." Daniel looked at him carefully. "You called her a disgrace." My father didn't flinch. "She chose to abandon her responsibilities." Daniel's voice softened. "She risked her life for strangers." "She abandoned her own family," my father repeated. The contrast hung heavier this time. Even the musicians had lowered their instruments completely. No one pretended anymore. The man from the second row studied my father quietly. "Do you know she refused public recognition?" My father gave a dismissive shrug. "That's her choice." "She also declined a press interview," the man continued. "Said she didn't want attention." Daniel looked at me again, admiration clear now. "You never wanted anyone to know." "I did my job." My sister shifted uncomfortably. "This is turning into a spectacle." My father seized that line. "Exactly, let's move on." He gestured toward the officiant again. The officiant nodded, uncertain. The string quartet lifted their bows, once more tentative. I stepped toward the exit again, determined not to drag this further. I hadn't come for recognition. I hadn't come for reconciliation. I had come to watch my sister get married and then disappear again. "Emily," Daniel said. I paused. He hesitated, then asked quietly, "Did you stay behind after we left?" "Yes." "Why?" "There were more civilians." He swallowed. "You could have been killed." "That wasn't the priority." The man from the second row added quietly, "She also helped coordinate evacuation under fire." Daniel's eyes widened. "You were in charge." I shook my head. Everyone was just trying to survive. My father exhaled sharply, impatience returning. This is unnecessary glorification. No one agreed with him out loud, but the silence itself felt like opposition. Daniel turned to him. "Sir, she saved my daughter." My father didn't respond immediately. He looked at me, really looked this time as if trying to reconcile the uniform, the calm posture, the stories with the daughter he had dismissed years earlier. For the first time, uncertainty replaced certainty in his eyes. But pride came back just as quickly. "That doesn't change anything," he said. The words fell colder than before. And that's when Daniel straightened his voice, gaining quiet strength. "It changes everything for me." Daniel's words didn't echo loudly, but they landed with unmistakable weight. The room shifted again, not dramatically, not all at once, but like a tide turning. Guests who had been watching politely now leaned forward openly. My sister lowered her bouquet slightly, her fingers tightening around the stems. My father's expression hardened, but the certainty he carried earlier had begun to fracture. "What exactly does that mean?" my father asked, his tone controlled but edged. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He looked at me instead, searching for permission, perhaps. I gave a slight shake of my head. I didn't want this to become a performance. But he spoke anyway, quietly, carefully, choosing his words as if they mattered. "It means," he said, "that I wouldn't be standing here today without her." The sentence fell gently, but it rippled through the room. Someone near the back whispered. A chair creaked. Even the photographer lowered his camera, sensing that whatever was happening mattered more than staged smiles. Victoria exhaled sharply. "Daniel, please, we're about to start." He glanced at her, then back at me. "I know, just give me a moment." My father stepped forward. "We're delaying the ceremony long enough. This has gone too far." Daniel met his gaze calmly. "With respect, sir, I think it already has." The man from the second row, still standing, remained silent, now observing. His presence alone seemed to validate everything that had been said. My father noticed him too, and that seemed to irritate him more than anything else. "You're turning a private family disagreement into a spectacle," my father said. Daniel replied quietly, "You turned it into one when you stopped her at the door." The truth of that hung in the air. My father didn't respond. He simply looked at me again, this time longer, studying details he might never have noticed before. The posture, the composure, the quiet stillness that came from years of discipline. Victoria's voice broke in again, strained. "Daniel, we're standing in front of everyone." He softened slightly. "I know, I'm sorry." But he didn't step back. Instead, he turned toward the guests briefly, then back to me. "My daughter still has the jacket you gave her," he said. The memory surfaced instantly, the oversized field jacket swallowing her small frame. She had clung to it even after the helicopter landed. "She was freezing," I said. "She still sleeps with it sometimes," he continued. A faint murmur passed through the crowd, softer this time, more human than curious. The story had stopped being dramatic and started becoming personal. Victoria shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "That's very touching, but—" Daniel gently cut her off. "She asks about you every winter. She says the snow reminds her." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't expected any of this. That day in Helmand had been just another mission, chaotic, dangerous, forgettable compared to others. I hadn't imagined it lived on in someone else's life. "I'm glad she's okay," I said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Because of you." My father crossed his arms again, the gesture defensive now rather than authoritative. "We are drifting away from the purpose of today." Daniel turned to him. "Sir, I understand this is complicated, but I can't ignore what she did. It has nothing to do with this family." Daniel's voice softened. "She is this family." The words hit harder than any accusation. My father inhaled slowly, visibly restraining his reaction. "She forfeited that," he said. I finally spoke. I never asked to be welcomed back. That shifted the tone. The statement wasn't angry, just factual. My father looked at me sharply as if he hadn't expected that answer. Daniel glanced between us. "You didn't come to confront anyone." "Number. Then why come at all?" I hesitated. The answer felt simple, almost fragile. "To watch my sister get married." Victoria's expression flickered surprise mixed with something softer, quickly masked again. My father shook his head slightly. You should have stayed away. Maybe, I said, but I didn't want to regret not seeing it. The honesty quieted the room again. Even Victoria didn't interrupt this time. Daniel exhaled slowly, absorbing it. You came just to sit in the back. Yes. And leave afterward. Yes. He nodded almost to himself. That sounds like you. My father frowned. You barely know her. Daniel replied quietly, I know what she did when it mattered. The distinction hung heavily. The man from the second row finally spoke again, calm as before. Character shows under pressure. My father didn't look at him. This is not a military tribunal. No, the man agreed. It's a wedding. The simplicity of that statement made several guests exchange faint smiles. The tension loosened slightly, though it didn't disappear. Daniel took a breath. Sir, I don't want conflict today, but I can't pretend she isn't standing here. My father's voice dropped. What exactly are you asking? Nothing, Daniel said, just let her stay. The request was gentle, but its significance was enormous. My father didn't respond immediately. He looked toward the guests, then at Victoria, then finally back at me. I could see the calculation in his eyes, reputation, control appearances. He was weighing everything. I came to watch quietly, I repeated. If that's not acceptable, I'll go. Daniel turned quickly. No, please don't. Victoria's shoulders tightened. She looked between us, then at her father. Dad. My father remained silent. For the first time in years, he looked uncertain. And in that hesitation, something shifted, not forgiveness, not acceptance, but a crack in the certainty that had defined him. He finally spoke slowly. She can stay, he said, but she sits in the back, no attention. I nodded once. That's all I wanted. Daniel exhaled, relieved. Victoria hesitated, then gave a stiff nod. The officiant cleared his throat again, sensing the moment closing. I moved quietly toward the last row. The marble floor felt cooler now, the tension easing slightly with each step. Guests parted subtly to let me pass. Some avoided eye contact. Others offered small, respectful nods. I sat near the end, hands folded, posture straight. Just another guest now. But the room felt different. And when Daniel returned to the altar, he glanced back at me once, not dramatic, not obvious, just a quiet acknowledgement. The ceremony was about to begin. But nothing about it would feel the same. The quartet resumed softly, hesitant at first, as though testing whether the room would allow the ceremony to move forward. Guests shifted back into their seats, smoothing jackets and adjusting dresses, trying to reassemble the illusion of a perfect wedding. The officiant smiled with professional warmth, clearing his throat gently. Victoria lifted her bouquet again, though her grip remained tighter than before. Daniel stood beside her, composed on the surface, but I noticed the subtle difference in his posture, the way he kept glancing toward the last row where I sat. I kept my eyes forward. I had learned long ago that attention could be as dangerous as conflict. The safest place was quiet observation. So I sat still, listening to the measured cadence of the officiant's voice, the faint clink of glassware, the distant hum of air conditioning. The scent of roses still filled the room, sweet and almost overwhelming. My father remained near the front, not seated. He stood beside the aisle, arms loosely folded as if guarding the ceremony from further disruption. From where I sat, I could see the rigid line of his shoulders. He hadn't looked back once. The officiant began, "We are gathered here today." The words floated gently, familiar and ceremonial. Victoria relaxed slightly. Daniel nodded at the appropriate moments. The guests leaned into the rhythm. For a few minutes it almost felt normal. Then Daniel's voice interrupted. "I'm sorry," he said softly, raising a hand. "Before we continue, there's something I need to say." The officiant paused, surprised but accommodating. Victoria turned toward him, confusion flickering across her face. "Daniel," she whispered. He looked at her with an apologetic smile. "Just a moment." My father's head turned sharply, his expression darkened. Daniel took a breath. "I know this is unexpected, but I don't want to begin this marriage while ignoring something important." The room stilled again. I felt the weight of attention shift, not toward me directly, but circling closer. Victoria forced a small smile. "We can talk later." He shook his head gently. "This won't take long." My father stepped forward. "Daniel, this is not appropriate." Daniel met his gaze calmly. "Respectfully, sir. It is. He turned slightly, his eyes scanning the room until they reached the last row. He didn't point, he didn't gesture, but everyone followed his gaze. I felt it, the quiet pull of 200 people noticing me again. I owe someone here my life, he said. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victoria's smile vanished. Years ago, Daniel continued, I was traveling overseas with my family. Our convoy was attacked. We were trapped. I thought we weren't going to make it. The room listened fully now. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. And then he said quietly, she appeared. I lowered my eyes slightly. I didn't want this. Not like this. She pulled my daughter out of a burning vehicle, he continued. She went back for my ex-wife. She refused to leave until everyone was safe. Victoria whispered, strained, Daniel. He reached for her hand briefly. I'm not trying to embarrass anyone. I can't pretend this didn't happen. My father's voice cut in. We acknowledged that already. Daniel shook his head. No, we acknowledged it privately. But I want to acknowledge it publicly. The distinction landed heavily. Guests shifted, clearly sensing the shift in tone. She never asked for recognition, he said. She never contacted us. She disappeared. But my daughter remembers her every day. The memory of that small hand gripping my sleeve returned again. I inhaled slowly, keeping my expression neutral. My daughter calls her the woman who came back, Daniel added. Victoria looked toward me now, not hostile, not warm, just uncertain. The certainty she carried earlier had faded. My father stepped closer to Daniel, lowering his voice, but not enough. This is turning into a tribute. Daniel replied softly, it's turning into honesty. Silence followed. The quartet remained still. The officiant clasped his hands, waiting. Daniel continued, quieter now. I don't know what family disagreements exist. I don't know what history there is. But I do know that when it mattered most, she didn't walk away. The words weren't directed at my father explicitly, but the meaning was clear. A subtle tension moved through the room. My father's jaw tightened. She walked away from this family. I spoke gently from the back row. I didn't walk away. Every head turned again. I left when I was told I wasn't welcome, I added. My voice wasn't loud, but the acoustics carried it. The honesty settled deeper than any accusation. Victoria's expression flickered. My father remained still, though the muscles in his face tightened. Daniel nodded slowly. Either way, I think she deserves to witness this day. My father didn't respond immediately. He looked down briefly, then back toward the aisle. His silence felt heavier than argument. The officiant cleared his throat carefully. Shall we continue? Daniel glanced at Victoria. She hesitated, then nodded once. Yes. The ceremony resumed. But something had changed. The words about love, commitment, and family carried new weight. When Daniel repeated his vows, his voice was steady, but he glanced once more toward the back. Victoria followed his gaze briefly, then looked away. My father finally sat down slowly, deliberately in the front row. The gesture seemed small, but it signaled something larger. He was no longer standing guard. He was simply part of the audience. The ceremony moved toward its conclusion. Rings exchanged. Soft applause. The officiant smiled warmly. By the power vested in me. He finished the declaration. Guests applauded louder, now relieved. The tension loosened. Victoria and Daniel kissed briefly, the moment tasteful and measured. As the applause faded, Daniel leaned toward the microphone again. One more thing, he said. A faint ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, nervous but lighter. I just want to say, some people change your life for a moment and never ask for anything in return. If you're lucky enough to recognize them, you should say thank you. He didn't look directly at me this time. He didn't need to. The applause softened into something more sincere, not dramatic, just respectful. I remained seated. And for the first time since I arrived, my father turned around. Our eyes met across the room. He didn't smile. But he didn't look away either. Applause faded into a low murmur as guests began to stand. Chairs slid softly across marble. The quartet shifted into a lighter melody, something celebratory but still restrained. The officiant stepped aside, smiling as photographers moved closer to capture the newly married couple. Victoria adjusted her veil, her expression composed again, though the tension hadn't completely left her shoulders. I remained seated in the last row. This was the moment I had come for the ceremony. Finished vows exchanged the quiet satisfaction of seeing my sister step into a new life. I could leave now, slip out before the reception began. No goodbyes, no explanations. That had always been the plan. I stood slowly. The movement was small, but Daniel noticed. He was shaking hands with one of his groomsmen when his eyes flicked toward the back. He excused himself gently and stepped away, weaving through guests with quiet determination. My father saw him coming. He straightened tension, returning instantly. "Daniel the photographer." "1 minute," Daniel replied. He reached me just as I stepped into the aisle. Up close, his expression softened again, not dramatic gratitude, just something steady and sincere. "You're leaving," he said. "Yes." "You don't have to. I came for the ceremony. It's finished." He nodded slowly, understanding. "Still, I'd like you to stay for the reception." I shook my head. "This day should be about you and Victoria." "It is," he said, "but I don't want you to feel unwelcome." I glanced briefly toward the front. My father was watching us. Victoria stood beside him, her posture stiff but not openly hostile. "I'm fine," I said quietly. Daniel hesitated. "My daughter would want me to ask." The mention of her tugged at something deeper than I expected. I allowed myself a faint smile. "Tell her I'm glad she's okay." "I will." We stood there for a moment, neither speaking. The room buzzed around us, laughter, congratulations, the clink of glasses. Yet the space between us felt strangely calm. Then my father approached. His steps were measured, deliberate. Guests nearby fell silent again, sensing something unresolved. He stopped a few feet away, not too close, not too distant. For a moment he said nothing. Daniel stepped slightly aside, giving him space. My father looked at me not with anger this time, but with something harder to define. Evaluation, perhaps. Or uncertainty. "You were going to leave," he said. "Yes." He nodded once. "You saw the ceremony?" "Yes." Silence stretched. I waited, unsure what he wanted. Daniel spoke gently. "Sir, I hope she might stay." My father didn't respond immediately. His eyes moved to Daniel, then back to me. "The reception will begin shortly," he said. "I know." "You could remain," he added. The hesitation in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. It wasn't an invitation, not quite, but it wasn't dismissal either. I answered simply, "I don't want to make things uncomfortable." Victoria finally spoke, her tone controlled. "It's already been eventful." I met her gaze. I didn't intend that. She exhaled quietly. "I know." That admission softened the air slightly. Daniel looked between us. "You're both here. That's what matters." My father shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the sentiment. "We shouldn't prolong this." I nodded, "Then I'll go." I stepped past them, moving toward the exit. My footsteps echoed faintly again. I felt their eyes following me, Daniel's openly, Victoria's cautiously, my father's more difficult to read. I reached the doors. "Emily." The word stopped me. It came from my father, quiet, almost reluctant. I turned. He stood a few yards away, hands at his sides. The posture lacked his usual authority. For a moment he seemed unsure what to do with them. "Yes." He hesitated. The pause stretched longer than anyone expected. "You," he began, then stopped. He glanced briefly at Daniel, then back at me. "You did well. Over there." The words were awkward, unfinished, but they carried something new, acknowledgement. I held his gaze. I did my job. He nodded slowly, still. Another silence. Victoria watched carefully. Daniel remained still, sensing the fragility of the moment. "I didn't expect to see you today," my father said. "I know. You look—" He stopped again, searching for a neutral word. "Different." 8 years, I replied gently. He nodded once more. The distance between us felt smaller, though nothing had truly changed. No apology, no reconciliation, just a narrow bridge of recognition. "I won't keep you," he said. "All right." I turned back toward the doors. Behind me, the reception music began to swell slightly, a brighter tune now signaling celebration. Laughter returned. Glasses clinked. The wedding resumed its rhythm. I stepped into the hallway outside the ballroom. The air felt cooler, quieter. My reflection appeared faintly in the polished wall uniform, crisp expression, calm. I exhaled slowly. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Daniel again. You didn't have to say goodbye, he said. I didn't. I just wanted to thank you one more time. You already did. He smiled faintly. I know, but some debts deserve repetition. I shook my head gently. There's no debt. He studied me for a moment. You really believe that? Yes. He nodded, accepting it. Then, I hope we meet again, under calmer circumstances. I'd like that. We shook hands, firm, respectful, no dramatics. As I turned to leave, I glanced once through the ballroom doors. My father stood near the front, speaking quietly with Victoria. For a brief second, he looked toward the hallway. Our eyes met again. This time he didn't look away immediately. And neither did I. The hallway lights felt softer than the ballroom chandeliers, warmer, less demanding. I walked slowly toward the exit, the sound of the reception fading behind me, laughter music glasses clinking. The door at the end of the corridor led to the hotel lobby, and beyond that, the quiet evening air. I told myself I would step outside, call a rideshare, and disappear the way I had lived for years, quietly, without leaving ripples. I had almost reached the elevator when I heard footsteps again. Not hurried, not hesitant, familiar. I turned. My father stood at the end of the hallway. He had left the reception. That alone meant more than any words. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The distance between us felt smaller here, stripped of the audience, the expectations, the polished performance. He looked older up close. The sharp certainty in his eyes had softened, replaced by something more complicated, reflection, perhaps even regret. You're leaving, he said. Yes. He nodded as if confirming something he already knew. You always did leave quietly. I considered that. You preferred it that way. He didn't deny it. The silence stretched. The distant music drifted faintly through the doors behind him. He clasped his hands loosely, a gesture I'd never seen before. My father was never uncertain. He was decisive, controlled. But now he seemed to be searching for the right words and finding none. I watched you walk in, he said finally. I almost didn't recognize you. Time does that. No, he replied softly. It wasn't just time. He looked at the ribbons on my uniform, then back at my face. You carry yourself differently. 8 years changes people. Yes, he said, it does. Another pause. I waited. He took a slow breath. When you told me you were enlisting, he said, I thought you were throwing everything away. I remember. I believed success meant stability, reputation, predictability. He glanced toward the ballroom doors. Things I could control. I listened quietly. I thought the military was chaos, risk, loss. He swallowed slightly. I thought I'd lose you. You did. The words came out gently, not accusing, just truth. He nodded, yes. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I told myself I was protecting the family, he continued. But today, he paused, searching. Today I realized I was protecting my pride. The admission settled heavily in the quiet hallway. I didn't respond immediately. The weight of hearing him say that after years of silence felt unfamiliar. You stood there calmly while I told you to leave, he said. You didn't argue. You didn't defend yourself. There was no point. That's not how you were before. No, I agreed, it's not. He studied me. The military changed you. Yes. For the better, he added quietly. I hadn't expected that. He exhaled slowly. Daniel spoke with me after the ceremony. I raised an eyebrow slightly. He told me about his daughter, the jacket, the snow. My father shook his head faintly. You never mentioned any of that. It wasn't important. It was, he said. I just didn't see it. Another silence. I thought you'd come to confront me, he admitted, to prove something. I didn't. You came just to watch your sister. Yes. He nodded slowly. That surprised me. I leaned lightly against the wall, letting the moment breathe. I didn't want to regret not being here. He looked down briefly, then back up. I regret not being there. For what? For your graduation, your commission, the years in between. The honesty felt fragile. I didn't push it. You made your choice, I said softly. Yes, he replied, and I lived with it. The elevator chimed softly beside us. The doors slid open empty and waiting. I stepped toward it, then paused. I should go. He nodded but didn't move. I don't expect anything to change, I added gently. He considered that. Things already changed. How? I saw who you became. I held his gaze. You always could have. Yes, he said quietly. I just chose not to. The elevator doors began to close. I stepped inside, pressing the lobby button. He remained in the hallway, hands at his sides. Emily, he said. I stopped the door with my hand. I'm proud of you. The words were simple, not dramatic, not loud, but they carried everything he had never said. I nodded once, thank you. The doors closed slowly between us. The elevator descended quietly. My reflection appeared again in the mirrored walls, the same uniform, the same calm posture. But something inside felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because something had finally been acknowledged. When I stepped into the lobby, the evening sun filtered through tall glass windows, casting long golden lines across the floor. I walked outside into the cool air. The noise of the wedding faded completely behind me. I didn't look back. But I knew he was still standing there. And maybe that was enough. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever walked away from someone you loved, or waited years for a single word that never came, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me where you're watching from, and whether you think pride is ever worth the distance it creates. Stories like this remind me that time doesn't always heal everything, but sometimes it opens a door we thought was closed forever. We share stories like this every day, quiet moments, difficult choices, and the fragile bridges between people. If you'd like to keep walking this path with me, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next journey. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need it tonight. Sometimes the smallest reconciliation begins with someone simply listening. I came home from Ramstein expecting quiet. What I found instead was a white sign staked into the dirt at the end of my grandfather's long gravel drive. Estate auction. Black letters bold and final. My duffel was still biting into my shoulder. The smell of jet fuel hadn't even left my clothes yet. I stood there staring at that sign while my phone vibrated in my pocket, a missed call from my father. When I finally dialed the auction company listed below the date, the woman on the line went silent. Then she said carefully, like she was stepping around broken glass, "Ma'am, everything was sold last month." The drive from the airport should have taken 90 minutes. It took me almost 3 hours because I kept pulling over my hands, shaking on the wheel, my mind refusing to line up with what my eyes had seen. I'd left Germany on a gray morning with rain crawling down the terminal windows, thinking about my grandfather's farm the way you think about a lighthouse, steady, waiting unchanged. He'd raised 3 kids there. He'd buried my grandmother under the oak by the fence. He'd taught me how to mend wire and read weather off the horizon. That land was the one constant in a family that otherwise drifted. When I turned onto County Road 18, the fields looked wrong. Not empty, just unfamiliar. The old red tractor wasn't parked near the barn. The gate was closed when it was usually open. And there at the end of the drive was the sign. I parked and got out, gravel crunching under my boots. The wind moved through the corn stubble like it was whispering to me, and for a moment I thought maybe I was still jet-lagged, still not fully back. My father was waiting by the house with my brother and sister. They were already inside my grandfather's place, doors open, boxes stacked. My brother Mark leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed like he owned the view. My sister Elaine had her hair pulled back tight, her voice sharp and organized as she directed someone I didn't recognize to carry something out to a truck. "Hey," my father said like I'd just come home from the grocery store. I asked the question that felt obvious. "What is this?" He glanced at the sign, then back at me. "Estate sale," he said. "It's time." Time for what? For everyone to move on. That was when Elaine stepped closer, eyes flicking to my duffel. "We already took what we needed," she said. "You can take whatever's left." The words landed wrong. Whatever's left. Like my grandfather's life was a clearance rack. I didn't argue, not yet. I walked into the house. The air smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. Furniture was missing. The hutch where my grandmother kept her china was gone. The den looked stripped, no hunting rifles on the wall, no quilt folded over the back of the couch. My chest tightened as I moved room to room, inventorying absence. I found the kitchen table scarred where someone had dragged something heavy across it. The drawer where Grandpa kept his ledgers was empty. So was the cabinet with the mason jars full of nails and bolts he'd collected for decades. These weren't random losses. These were choices. Who decided to do this now? I asked, my voice steady, because that's what training does. It teaches you how to keep your tone even when everything inside you is loud. My father sighed. You weren't here. I looked at him. I called every Sunday. He waved a hand. That's not the same. Mark snorted. You live halfway around the world. What did you expect? I expected a phone call. I expected a conversation. I expected not to come home to a sign in the dirt announcing the end of the place that raised me. Who's running the auction? I asked. Elaine answered quickly, too quickly. A local company. They're reputable. What's their name? She gave it. I pulled out my phone and stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking under my weight. The wind was colder than I remembered. I dialed. A woman answered, cheerful at first. I gave my name. I asked about the auction date. I asked what lots were available. There was a pause. I could hear papers shifting, keys tapping. Then her voice changed. Ma'am, she said the estate has already been liquidated. I leaned against the post, the porch rail digging into my spine. Liquidated. Yes, the assets were sold privately. Settlement closed weeks ago. I swallowed. Then why is your sign on the property? Another pause. That shouldn't be there. Who authorized the sale? She hesitated. I can't discuss specifics without... I'm the granddaughter, I said, and nothing about this makes sense. She lowered her voice. I'd suggest you speak with the executor. I ended the call and stood there, the house humming behind me with voices and footsteps that didn't belong. When I turned back, my father's face told me he already knew what I was going to say. They told me everything was sold, I said. Mark scoffed. So the auction is a lie. Elaine's mouth tightened. Don't be dramatic. Then explain it, I said. Explain why they sold everything before I even landed. My father rubbed his forehead. It was easier this way. Easier for who? He didn't answer. I walked down the steps and into the yard past the barn where the doors were locked. I ran my hand along the fence post my grandfather had replaced the summer I turned 16. The wood was rough and familiar, grounding me. This place wasn't just property. It was memory. It was work. It was promise. Behind me, my father called out, "You can take what's left." I turned slowly. What's left of what? He looked away. That was the moment I understood something fundamental had shifted. They weren't waiting for my opinion. They'd already moved on. They'd already divided, already justified. And they were counting on me to accept scraps because I wore a uniform and lived far away and had learned over years how to endure loss quietly. I picked up my duffel and set it by the truck. I'm going to town, I said. Elaine crossed her arms. Why? Because I replied someone's lying, and I'm done guessing who. I drove back down the long gravel drive, the auction sign rattling in the rearview mirror as I passed. My phone buzzed with a text from Elaine, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I didn't answer. By the time I reached the main road, my hands were steady, not because I was calm, because something else had taken over. The same thing that kicks in when plans go sideways and you have to adapt fast. I didn't know yet who had signed what or where the money went. I didn't know how deep the damage ran. But I knew this: the land that taught me to stand my ground deserved better than to be erased quietly, and so did I. The county clerk's office sat between a tax prep place and a diner that still advertised meatloaf on Wednesdays. I parked out front and took a minute before going in, palms resting on the steering wheel, breathing the way they teach you to breathe when your thoughts start stacking on top of each other. In Germany, everything had been scheduled down to the minute. Here, nothing was. Inside, the air smelled like paper and old coffee. A bell chimed softly when I opened the door. The woman behind the counter looked up over her glasses, the practiced neutrality of someone who'd seen every version of family trouble pass through her hands. "How can I help you?" she asked. I gave my grandfather's name, the farm's address. I asked carefully for any filings related to the estate. She didn't look surprised. She just nodded and disappeared into the back. While I waited, my mind drifted back to the version of this place before it became an estate, before it was something to be divided and sold. My grandfather believed land was a responsibility, not an asset. He'd say it every time someone talked about money. The land doesn't belong to you, he'd tell me. You belong to it. You take care of it, and one day it'll take care of someone else. I was 9 the first time he let me drive the tractor, his hand steady over mine, the engine rumbling like a heartbeat. When I told him years later that I was joining the military, he didn't argue. He just nodded and said, "Serve clean. Come home clean." He never talked about wills or trusts out loud, but he talked about fairness, about doing things right, about not taking what wasn't yours just because you could. The clerk returned with a thin folder, too thin. "This is everything on file," she said. I flipped through it, standing at the counter. Probate filing. Executor listed as my father. A notice of inventory. A few dates circled in pen. "No trust documents?" I asked. She shook her head. "None recorded here." My stomach tightened. Grandpa had been meticulous. He kept receipts from the 80s. He labeled everything. There was no world where he left something this important to chance. "When was this filed?" I asked. She pointed to a date, 3 weeks before my grandfather died. "That's not possible," I said. She met my eyes, then something like sympathy flickering there. "It happens more than you think." I thanked her and walked back out into the sun, the folder tucked under my arm like it might run away if I loosened my grip. In the parking lot, my phone buzzed. A voicemail from my father. I didn't listen to it. Instead, I drove back toward the farm, past fields that looked too open, now too exposed. The sign was still there. The house was quieter than before. Mark's truck was gone. Elaine's car remained. I found Elaine in the living room, going through a box of papers at the dining table. She looked up, startled, then composed herself. "Did you calm down?" she asked. "I went to the county," I said. Her hands froze, just for a second. "There's a probate filing," I continued. "You didn't mention that." She closed the box. Dad handled it. "There's no trust on record." She shrugged. "Maybe Grandpa never finished it." I laughed once, short and sharp. "You didn't know him." She stiffened. "You weren't here." There it was again. The phrase they used like a shield. "I was stationed overseas," I said. "I wasn't absent." She leaned back in her chair. "You can't expect things to stop because you're gone." "I didn't," I replied. "I expected honesty." She stood. "What are you accusing us of?" "Nothing," I said, "yet." Her eyes narrowed. "You always think you're better than us because you left." I thought of the nights I'd sat in a barracks room listening to planes take off, thinking about this place, thinking about home. Better wasn't the word. Further away was. "I think you did this fast on purpose," I said, before I could ask questions. She laughed brittle. "You're being paranoid." I walked past her and down the hall to my grandfather's bedroom. The dresser drawers were empty. The small safe he kept in the closet was gone. "Where's the safe?" I asked. Elaine appeared in the doorway. Dad took it. "When?" "After the funeral." "What was in it?" She hesitated. "Important stuff." "Like what?" She crossed her arms. "Why does it matter?" "Because that safe held more than papers. It held intent. It held the truth of how my grandfather wanted things handled. And now it was gone. That night I slept in my old room, the one I'd kept even after moving out. The walls felt closer than I remembered. I lay awake listening to the house settle every creak, a reminder that this place was changing without my consent. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "You're asking the wrong questions." I stared at the screen, pulse quickening. "Who is this?" I typed back. No response. I sat up, heart pounding. Someone knew I was digging. Someone didn't want me to keep going. The next morning, I drove to the diner in town, the one Grandpa took me to after early mornings in the field. I ordered coffee and eggs and listened. In small towns, information doesn't hide well. It drifts. 2 booths over, an older man mentioned seeing trucks late at night at my grandfather's place. Another said the auctioneer had been around weeks ago, not days. I finished my coffee and left a tip, the realization settling heavy in my chest. This hadn't been rushed because of grief. It had been rushed because of opportunity. When I pulled back into the driveway, my father was sitting on the porch alone, hands clasped, staring out at the fields. "We need to talk," he said. I nodded. "Yes," I replied, "we do." But not yet. Not until I knew exactly what had been taken and why. Because land remembers, and so do I. The morning after I talked to my father on the porch, the farm felt hollowed out. Not empty in the way a place is empty when people are gone, but stripped like someone had come through with a list and a deadline. I walked the property slowly the way my grandfather used to walk it at dawn, hands behind his back, boots leaving deliberate prints in the soil. He believed you could tell a lot by what the land looked like after people thought they were finished with it. The barn doors were locked. That alone was wrong. Grandpa never locked them. If someone needs shelter, he'd say they'll find it here. I tried the handle anyway. Solid. New lock. I circled the building, counting what was missing by the marks left behind. The outline where the hay baler used to sit. The clean rectangle on the wall where his tools hung in careful order. Someone had taken time here. Someone had planned. Inside the house, Elaine was packing another box. She didn't look up when I entered the dining room. "I'm taking the photo albums," she said, as if reading my mind. "You don't need those." I stopped short. "Those are mine too." She sighed, annoyed. "You have memories. I have responsibilities." "That's not how inheritance works," I said. She taped the box shut with a sharp rip. "Inheritance isn't a word anyone used until you showed up." I thought of the safe again, of the way my grandfather used to tap the top of it before closing the closet like a habit he didn't realize he had. That safe held deeds, letters, insurance policies, and something else. I remembered him once late in the evening telling me quietly that he'd made sure things were clear. Clear didn't look like this. My brother's voice came from the kitchen. "You still here?" I turned to see Mark leaning in the doorway, coffee in hand, wearing the relaxed confidence of someone who believed the hard part was already over. "I live here," I said. He laughed. "You live wherever the Air Force tells you." I didn't correct him, it wasn't the point. "What did you take?" I asked. He shrugged. "Stuff." "What stuff?" "The tractor, the truck, a few guns. Grandpa said I could have them." "When did he say that?" Mark's jaw tightened. "Before." "Before when—" He looked away. "Before all this." I waited. Silence stretched. He broke it with a scoff. "You're not going to win this by interrogating us." "I'm not trying to win," I said. "I'm trying to understand." He took a step closer. "Then understand this: you weren't here. Elaine was, Dad was, we handled things." "Handled," I repeated. "Or helped yourselves?" His eyes flashed, careful. Careful of what I asked. The truth. He set his coffee down hard. "You always come in like you know better." "I know what Grandpa valued," I said, "and it wasn't speed." Mark shook his head and walked past me out the back door. I heard his truck start, then fade down the drive. By noon, the house was quieter than it had been since the funeral. Elaine left with another load. My father retreated to the den, door closed. I sat at the kitchen table with the probate folder spread out in front of me, cross-referencing dates, with notes I'd started scribbling in the margins. That was when I noticed something small but wrong. The executor filing listed my father as acting on behalf of the estate. Standard. But the inventory date preceded the official death certificate by 2 days. That didn't happen by accident. Someone had moved early. Someone had known the timing. I called the number on the probate filing, a local attorney's office. The receptionist confirmed my father had come in with his daughter to file paperwork. Elaine. I thanked her and hung up the pieces, aligning into a picture I didn't like. That afternoon I drove into town again. This time I went to the bank my grandfather had used for decades. The same branch manager still worked there, older now, glasses perched on his nose. He recognized me immediately. "You're his granddaughter." "Yes, sir." "I'm sorry about your loss," he said, and he meant it. "I have a question," I said. "Did my grandfather ever set up a trust here?" He frowned. "I can't discuss details without—" "I understand," I said. "But can you tell me if one exists?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There were discussions." "Were they finished?" He leaned back, choosing his words. "To my knowledge, yes." My pulse jumped. "Then why isn't it on file with the county?" His frown deepened. "That's unusual." He didn't say more, but he didn't need to. I left the bank with confirmation of what my gut had been telling me since I saw the auction sign. Something had been buried. Something intentional. When I got back to the farm, my father was waiting for me at the table. He looked tired, older than he had a week ago. "We should talk now," he said. I sat across from him. "Okay." He folded his hands. "Your grandfather didn't want this to be complicated." "And yet," I said quietly, "it is." He exhaled. Elaine pushed to move quickly. She said the bills were stacking up. that taxes were coming due. Were they? I asked. He hesitated, some. Enough to sell everything in secret. His shoulders sagged. I thought I was doing the right thing. By who? By all of us. I leaned forward. You filed probate before he passed. His eyes widened. That's not... It's on record, I said. You let them take things that weren't theirs. He closed his eyes. I didn't know how to stop it. The truth in that was worse than a lie. That evening I sat alone on the back steps, watching the sun drop behind the trees. I held one of the few things left, a worn notebook my grandfather kept in his coat pocket. I'd found it tucked behind a shelf, missed in the rush. Inside were notes about planting cycles, weather patterns, and on the last page, a line written in careful ink. Make sure it's done right. I didn't know yet how big this was going to get. I didn't know how far it would go. But I knew I couldn't let it end here. Because what was left wasn't just furniture and tools. It was the truth. And I was done letting it be packed away and driven off in the night. The law office sat above a hardware store that still sold nails by the pound. The stairs creaked as I climbed them, each step loud in the quiet afternoon. I hadn't slept much the night before. I'd stayed up rereading the probate file, my grandfather's notebook open beside it. The words "make sure it's done right" circling my thoughts like a command. The attorney's name was on a small brass plaque by the door. Inside the office smelled faintly of dust and lemon polish. Framed certificates lined the walls, interspersed with black and white photos of the town from decades ago. Grain silos, a Main Street parade, a courthouse ribbon cutting. This was a place that remembered things. The attorney himself was in his late 50s, hair silver at the temples, tie loosened. He listened without interrupting as I laid everything out: the auction sign, the private sale, the missing safe, the early probate filing, the bank manager's hesitation. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his hands. Your grandfather was careful, he said. I remember him. You helped him set things up, I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. A family trust, finalized last year. My breath caught. Then why isn't it recorded? It was, he said. Then it was withdrawn. By who? He looked at me steadily. By your father, acting under a power of attorney. The room felt smaller. He didn't have the authority to do that. No, the attorney agreed, he didn't. He opened a drawer and pulled out copies. Pages slid across the desk toward me, heavy with significance. The trust named all 3 grandchildren as beneficiaries. It spelled out the conditions for any sale notice, consent, oversight, none of which had happened. This, he said, tapping the page, is why things moved quickly. Someone wanted assets out of the trust before questions could be asked. Elaine, I said. He didn't confirm it, he didn't need to. What happens now, I asked. That depends on how far you want to take it. I thought of the auction sign rattling in the wind, of Mark driving away with the tractor, of my father sitting at the table saying he didn't know how to stop it. I want it corrected, I said, by the book. He nodded once. Then we start by freezing what's left and tracing what's gone. The next 48 hours moved faster than the weeks before it. Notices went out. Banks were contacted. Buyers were informed that title could be challenged. Some reacted with anger. Others with relief. They hadn't liked how rushed the sale felt either. One woman called me in tears. She'd bought my grandmother's dining set not knowing its history. If it needs to come back, she said, I understand. Her kindness sat heavy in my chest. That evening, my father knocked on my door. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders rounded, hands empty. I talked to the lawyer, he said. I nodded. I know. He swallowed. Elaine said it was fine. She said the trust was just paperwork. Paper is what keeps people honest, I replied. He flinched. I was trying to keep the peace. At whose expense? He didn't answer. Outside headlights swept across the yard. Mark's truck pulled in. Elaine followed in her car. They came into the house together, their confidence gone, replaced by tight smiles and clipped movements. We need to talk, Elaine said. We already are, I replied. She sat crossing her legs, eyes sharp. You're blowing this up. I'm correcting it. You could ruin Dad. He signed documents he didn't have the right to sign. She leaned forward. You weren't here. You don't understand the pressure. I understand authority, I said, and I understand abuse of it. Mark slammed his hand on the table. You're doing this out of spite. I looked at him. I'm doing this because Grandpa trusted us not to tear his life apart. Silence followed, the kind that presses in on you. Elaine stood abruptly. You think some papers make you right? No, I said quietly. They make the truth visible. My phone buzzed. A message from the attorney injunction filed. Transfers paused. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not satisfaction, not victory, just steadiness. From this point on, I said, everything goes through counsel. No more side deals, no more midnight trucks. My father sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. Elaine stared at me like I'd betrayed her. Mark looked away. I stepped outside into the cool evening air. The fields were darkening, the sky streaked with orange and purple. Somewhere a fence wire hummed softly in the breeze. Paper doesn't forget. It doesn't care who's loud or who's fast. It waits. And when you finally look at it closely, it tells you exactly where things went wrong. I stood there a long time listening to the land breathe, knowing the hardest part was still ahead. By the end of the week, the farm no longer felt like a private family problem. It felt like a story the town was beginning to recognize. That's how these places work. You don't need headlines. You need conversations. A pause when someone sees you at the post office. A longer look than usual at the grocery store. People didn't ask questions outright, not at first. They just watched, measuring which version of the truth would hold. The first knock came from across the fence line. Mr. Halverson, who'd farmed the neighboring acreage since before I was born, stood there with his hat in his hands. I heard things got tangled, he said carefully. That's one way to put it. He nodded. Your granddad wouldn't have wanted it done like this? I waited. He shifted his weight, then added, I saw trucks, late nights, week before he passed. Didn't sit right with me. Did you see who was driving? I asked. He hesitated, then shook his head. Didn't want to assume. But I remember Elaine's car. That night I wrote everything down. Names, dates, times. I'd learned overseas that memory gets slippery under pressure. Paper didn't. The next call came from the auction company, a different voice this time, male, formal, strained. We've been advised to cooperate, he said. We were told the executor had full authority. Who told you that? I asked. A family member. Which one? Another pause. Ms. Elaine. The pattern was clear now, not a misunderstanding, a design. Word spread faster after that. A woman from church stopped by with a casserole and a story about how she'd been approached to buy one of Grandpa's rifles privately, cash only. A mechanic admitted he'd serviced Mark's truck after it hauled equipment off-site, equipment that wasn't listed anywhere official. Each conversation tightened the net. Not everyone was sympathetic. Some people avoided me, others whispered that I was stirring trouble, that I should let it go for the sake of family. I heard it in the diner, felt it in the way conversations dropped when I walked past. I thought about that a lot, about the idea that peace is more important than truth, about how often women are asked to smooth things over, to absorb damage quietly, so everyone else can move on. That night my father sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same one his father had built by hand. They're talking, he said. I know. You don't have to do this. Yes, I replied, I do. He rubbed his hands together. Elaine says you're trying to punish her. I'm trying to stop her. For what? His voice cracked. For trying to keep things together. For deciding she gets to choose who matters. He looked down. She said you'd never come back anyway. The words landed harder than I expected. I came back, I said, and that should have been enough. He didn't respond. 2 days later, the injunction went public. Notices posted, transfers flagged, buyers contacted. Some were angry. One man threatened to sue everyone involved. Another apologized over and over, embarrassed to have been part of something that smelled wrong. I met with the attorney again, this time with a deputy from the county present. Statements were taken, documents copied. Elaine was formally notified that her communications would be reviewed. She showed up that evening furious. You went to the sheriff, she demanded. I went to the law, I said. She laughed sharply. You're really going to burn the whole thing down? No, I replied. You already did. I'm just turning on the lights. Mark stood behind her, jaw tight, eyes darting. He didn't look like a man confident in his choices. He looked like someone waiting for the ground to give way. You didn't have to involve outsiders, he said. You involved them when you sold what wasn't yours. Elaine stepped closer. Dad signed. Dad trusted you. She flinched just slightly. The deputy cleared his throat. From here on, communication goes through counsel, he said. Any attempt to move assets could result in charges. That word charges hung in the air. After they left, the house felt too quiet. My father sat heavily staring at nothing. I failed him, he said, and I failed you. I didn't rush to comfort him. Some moments need to sit. Outside, the land was settling into evening. Crickets, a distant truck, the low hum of the highway, life going on. I walked the fence line again, the posts solid under my hand. This place had survived droughts, floods, bad years. It had outlasted people who thought they could bend it to their will. Inside, my phone buzzed with a message from the attorney. Funds traced, accounts identified, next steps pending. I sat on the porch steps, the weight of it all pressing down, not just the betrayal, but the responsibility. Doing the right thing doesn't make you popular, it just makes you necessary. As the sun dipped low, I thought about my grandfather's hands, rough and steady, and the way he believed in accountability without cruelty. I was beginning to understand that lesson more deeply now. This wasn't about reclaiming objects. It was about restoring order, about saying that what's built over a lifetime can't be dismantled quietly because it's inconvenient. The town was watching, the law was moving, and for the first time since I came home, I felt like the ground beneath my feet was firm again. The meeting happened on a Monday morning, the kind of gray, undecided day that feels appropriate for things you don't want to face, but know you have to. We gathered not at the farm, but in the attorney's office, the neutral ground where no one could claim emotional territory. My father arrived first, shoulders hunched inside a jacket that used to fit him better. Mark came next, late eyes shadowed. Elaine was last heels, clicking sharply against the floor like she wanted everyone to know she wasn't afraid. She was wrong about that. We sat around a long wooden table scarred with old marks, the kind left by decades of people pressing down too hard with their pens. The attorney laid out folders in front of each of us. A deputy from the county stood near the door, quiet, but unmistakably present. This is not a criminal proceeding. The attorney began calm and precise. Not yet. This is a review of fiduciary conduct. Elaine crossed her arms. You're making this sound dramatic. He didn't look at her. I'm making it sound accurate. He started with the trust documents, sliding copies across the table. He pointed out the clauses beneficiaries required notices limitations on authority. He explained slowly how withdrawing the trust without consent, then liquidating assets privately constituted a breach. Mark shifted in his chair. We needed the money. For what the attorney asked. Silence. For Dad, Elaine said finally, for expenses. The attorney nodded once. We traced the funds. Elaine's jaw tightened. My father's hands began to shake. Some of the proceeds went to outstanding bills, the attorney continued. Some went to accounts held by Mr. Mark and Ms. Elaine. Mark stood abruptly. That's not fair. The deputy's presence suddenly mattered. Sit down, the attorney said evenly. Mark did. My father stared at the table, eyes wet. I didn't know it went that far. You signed the authority, the attorney said gently. That made you responsible. My father looked at me, then really looked at me like he was seeing the cost of his choices written on my face. I thought I was helping, he said. You were choosing, I replied. There's a difference. Elaine leaned forward. You don't understand what it was like here. You left. Everything fell on us. I didn't leave the family, I said. I served, and I came back. Her voice rose. You think that makes you better? No, I said quietly. I think it makes me careful. The attorney outlined the consequences, civil penalties, restitution, the possibility of further investigation if cooperation stopped. He spoke in plain language, the kind meant to leave no room for misunderstanding. Elaine's confidence cracked. What do you want? She demanded, looking at me. I took a breath. I want the trust reinstated. I want full accounting. I want the land protected from any further sale without unanimous consent. And us, Mark asked. I want you to answer for what you took. My father covered his face. I never wanted it to come to this. Neither did Grandpa, I said. The meeting ended without shouting. That surprised me. The damage was too real now for theatrics. People signed where they were told to sign. Elaine's pen hovered more than once before touching paper. Mark avoided my eyes entirely. Outside the air felt sharper, cleaner. My father walked with me to my car. He looked older than he had a week ago, like the truth had accelerated time. "I failed you," he said again. "I know," I replied. "What matters now is what you do next." He nodded slowly. "I'll cooperate." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was accountability. And sometimes that's the first real step. That night back at the farm, I walked the perimeter alone. The fields were quiet, resting. I thought about how often the word family gets used to excuse harm, how people wrap it around bad decisions like insulation, hoping it will keep consequences out. But family, real family, doesn't take without asking. It doesn't rush in the dark. It doesn't tell one child they're expendable because they're strong. I stopped at the oak tree where my grandmother was buried. The leaves whispered overhead. "I'm trying," I said aloud, not sure who I was speaking to. The phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from the attorney: restitution process initiated. Assets flagged. Trust reinstatement pending court approval. Progress, not victory, progress. I sat on the ground back against the tree, feeling the earth steady beneath me. This was the cost of calling it family, facing the truth when pretending would be easier. Holding the line when letting go would hurt less in the moment, but more in the end. The land didn't ask me to be gentle. It asked me to be honest. And for the first time since I came home, I believed I was doing right by it. The court order came through on a Thursday afternoon, stamped and final in the way only official things ever are. The trust was reinstated. Sales executed outside its authority were voided or reversed where possible. Funds that had moved where they shouldn't have were ordered returned. It wasn't clean, it wasn't quick, but it was clear, and clarity after weeks of fog felt like breathing again. I drove back to the farm alone that evening. The sun was low, the fields lit from the side, every row casting a long, honest shadow. I parked at the end of the drive and sat there a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, listening to the wind move through what was left of the corn. No trucks this time, no whispers. Just land doing what it had always done, waiting. Inside the house, the rooms felt different. Not fuller, quieter. The absence was still there, but it no longer felt like theft. It felt like a pause, a place between what had been taken and what might be rebuilt. On the kitchen table sat a single envelope from the attorney, the last of the paperwork for now. I set it aside and walked through the rooms, slowly touching door frames, tracing the edge of the counter where my grandfather used to lean while he drank his coffee. Some things were gone for good. The tractor would come back after its buyer was reimbursed, but a few tools had vanished into pawn shops and private sales that couldn't be untangled. I accepted that. Loss doesn't always reverse just because the truth shows up. What mattered was that the taking had stopped. My father came by the next morning. He stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was welcome. I stepped aside to let him in. We sat at the table where we'd argued, where his father had taught him to fix watches and measure wood twice. "I've been thinking," he said, eyes on his hands, "about how I let things slide, about how I told myself it was love. Love without boundaries," I said, gently turns into permission. He nodded. "I'm learning that too late." "Not too late," I replied, "just late." We talked for a long time, not about blame, there was plenty of that to go around, but about responsibility. He agreed to step back from any role in managing the estate. He said he'd testify honestly if needed. He asked quietly if I could ever forgive him. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm willing to keep talking." That seemed to be enough for now. Mark didn't come by. Elaine sent a message through her attorney. Short, defensive. I read it once and put it down. Healing doesn't mean reopening doors that were slammed shut on purpose. Sometimes it means building better ones and choosing who gets a key. In the weeks that followed, neighbors stopped by. Some returned items they'd bought, embarrassed, apologetic. Others brought stories about my grandfather, about the land, about how they'd worried something wasn't right, but didn't know how to say it. I listened. I thanked them. I learned how wide a circle this place had drawn around itself without me ever realizing it. One afternoon, a young couple drove up. They'd bought a small piece of equipment at the private sale and wanted to make it right. We talked. We laughed awkwardly. We figured out a fair solution. They left relieved. I stood in the yard afterward, feeling the weight lift a little more. I kept one thing from the house that day, a small wooden box I'd found tucked behind a shelf overlooked in the rush. Inside were letters my grandfather had written to my grandmother when he was young. Simple notes: weather, work, love. On the last page of one, he'd written, "What lasts is what we take care of." That night I sat on the porch steps and read those letters while the stars came out. I thought about service and sacrifice and the quiet ways people show who they are. I thought about how easy it is to confuse speed with necessity, convenience with care. And I thought about how strength, real strength, often looks like standing still when everyone else wants you to move on. The farm won't look the same again. That's the truth. But it doesn't have to be erased to be honored. It can change honestly. It can be protected with rules that reflect the values it was built on. It can endure. I don't know how my family will look a year from now. Some wounds heal slowly. Some relationships don't return to what they were. What I do know is this: I didn't come home to save a place. I came home to save a promise. The promise that what's earned won't be taken in the dark. That the strong won't be treated as expendable. That love doesn't require silence. If you're listening to this and it sounds familiar, if you've stood in a house that no longer felt like yours, or been told to accept what's left because you were gone, know this: asking questions isn't betrayal. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty. And choosing truth over comfort doesn't make you the villain. It makes you responsible. If this story made you think of someone you love or something you're still carrying, I'd like to hear about it. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell me where you're listening from. We have many more stories like this, stories about family integrity and finding your footing again. So consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Let's keep walking this road together.